The screaming began before most passengers even realized what had happened. A teenage boy, no older than 16, clawed desperately at his eyes, his body jerking forward against the seatbelt. His gasps filled the narrow aisle, the sound sharp and uneven, as if the very air had turned against him. Around him, chaos ignited. Mothers shielded their children. Men shouted in confusion. Cell phones shot up like a wall of glass, capturing every second. And at the center of that storm, standing just inches away, was a flight attendant. Her arm stiff, the small black canister still raised in her hand. The sharp sting of chemical spray lingered in the air, spreading through the rows, burning throats and eyes. Some passengers coughed violently. Others turned their anger on her, demanding to know what she had done. But she said nothing. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Her eyes darted from face to face, almost searching for someone to back her. Instead, all she found were stares of disbelief and rising fury. The boy tried to speak, but his voice broke apart. He reached for the tray table, knocking over a plastic cup of water, the liquid spilling uselessly across his lap. His hands trembled as he whispered through clenched teeth, "I can't breathe." A woman in the row ahead leapt up, reaching for her carry-on, yelling, "I'm a nurse! Move! Let me help him!" But the attendant stepped forward, blocking her path, insisting with sharp authority, "Stay seated. Do not interfere." The nurse froze. The passengers froze. Everyone waited, stunned, as if time itself had stopped. And then the murmurs began, the whispers, the questions. What had this boy done? Why had she attacked him? Every second stretched longer than the last. The boy's chest rose and fell in jagged bursts, his eyes swollen, red, streaming tears he could not control. And while dozens of phones recorded every cough, every scream, every desperate plea, not a single person could yet see the full truth of what was unfolding. Because what happened on that flight was not just a clash between a passenger and a crew member. No, this was the start of something far bigger. And before the wheels of that plane ever touched the runway, the world would be forced to ask a question it still struggles with today. Whose side are you on? So, as you watch this story unravel, ask yourself, if you were in that cabin, sitting just a few rows away, would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Tell me in the comments. And before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed, because in cases like this, the truth is never what it first appears, and you don't want to miss what comes next. The flight attendant's voice cut sharply above the noise. He was aggressive. I had no choice. But the claim didn't match what people had seen. Moments earlier, Malik Carter had been seated quietly, headphones over his ears, scrolling through his phone. No raised voice, no threat, just a boy flying to Chicago with his father, unaware that his name would soon trend across every screen in America. Now he sat hunched forward, face buried in his hands, coughing, shaking, blinded by the chemical spray. His body trembled with every breath. A man across the aisle shouted, "You can't just spray a kid." Others nodded, voices rising. But not everyone agreed. A woman in the back leaned forward and muttered loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "If he got sprayed, he must have done something." And just like that, the cabin divided. Half outraged, half suspicious. Some stood to film. Others buried themselves in their seats, unwilling to get involved. The division spread like wildfire, an argument about guilt and innocence unfolding while the boy still fought to breathe. The nurse tried again. She crouched low, speaking gently. "Sweetheart, tilt your head back. Let me flush your eyes. You'll be okay." She reached out, but once again the flight attendant's hand shot out like a barrier. "Ma'am, sit down. Now." The nurse's jaw tightened. She hesitated, torn between orders and conscience. The boy's choking filled the silence, a sound that should have compelled everyone to act, but didn't. Whispers grew louder. Phones kept recording. A man muttered, "They're gonna sue her." Another replied, "Nah, the airline will cover it up. They always do." At row 20, a child began crying, overwhelmed by the shouting. A mother clutched her son, whispering reassurance she didn't quite believe herself. For those trapped inside that aluminum tube, 30,000 feet in the air, the minutes dragged like hours, and yet, through it all, one man remained perfectly still. 2 rows behind the boy, a figure in a gray suit sat with hands folded, his eyes locked on the scene. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't moved, not even when the spray cloud drifted toward his row, stinging his throat. He simply watched, silent, calculating. Some passengers noticed him. A few even whispered, "Why isn't he saying anything? Why is he just sitting there?" But they had no idea who he was, no idea what power he carried in that leather briefcase tucked neatly by his feet. Because while the flight attendant clung to her authority, while passengers shouted and filmed, while Malik fought for breath. The real storm hadn't even started yet. It was waiting, silent, patient, just 2 rows back. The boy's body jerked again, a dry cough tearing through his chest. He leaned sideways, nearly collapsing into the aisle, until the nurse caught his shoulder just in time. Her eyes blazed. She looked straight at the attendant and snapped, "If he passes out, that's on you. Do you understand me?" Gasps rippled down the row. A few passengers applauded softly, but the attendant's face hardened. She reached for the intercom, pressing the button with a trembling hand. "Captain, I need immediate assistance in the main cabin." The words froze the room. Passengers shifted uneasily, realizing this was about to escalate far beyond a single argument. An intercom call meant official reports, meant security, meant every passenger on that plane could become a witness or a suspect. Malik's cries grew weaker. His chest heaved, but the sound was fading, like a radio signal losing power. One girl whispered, "He's gonna faint." Another man muttered, "If he dies, that's on her." The smell of the spray lingered, burning noses and throats. Children coughed. Adults covered their faces with napkins, scarves, whatever they could grab. Yet nobody dared move closer, except the nurse, who still cradled the boy, defying orders. And still. The man in the gray suit remained silent. His gaze didn't leave Malik, not once. His breathing was calm, his hands steady. But in his eyes, hidden from most, was something sharper than fear, deeper than outrage. It was calculation. The attendant noticed him. For the first time, her confidence flickered. She stared across the rows, locking eyes with him. A second passed, then another. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath. Finally, she looked away, but by then it was too late. Passengers had seen the crack in her armor. And the man in the gray suit? He adjusted his tie, leaned back ever so slightly, and waited. Because when he finally stood up, nothing on that flight would ever be the same again. His name was Malik Henderson, 17 years old, a senior at Jefferson High School in Atlanta, Georgia. For most passengers, he was just another kid flying alone, but if you looked closer, you'd see more. Malik was the kind of teenager who carried a notebook everywhere, pages stuffed with sketches of sneakers he wanted to design one day. He had a quiet confidence, the kind that came from being raised by parents who told him, over and over, "You matter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." This wasn't supposed to be a dramatic trip. Malik was flying home from visiting his older cousin in Houston, where they'd spent the weekend playing basketball, eating too much barbecue, and staying up late talking about dreams bigger than their city blocks. He was tired, sure, but excited. Excited to be back in time for his team's first practice of the season, excited to see his mom, and especially excited to surprise his dad with the drawing he'd been working on, a pair of sneakers designed just for him. He sat in seat 22B, middle row, headphones on, sketchbook balanced on his lap. The world outside the window stretched endless and blue. The world inside the cabin felt safe enough, for a while. But here's the truth. Malik had been raised to notice things, to sense when eyes lingered too long, or when whispers carried tones they weren't supposed to. His dad had taught him early, "Not everyone will see you as just a kid, son. Some will see you as a threat. Stay sharp. Stay calm. Malik carried those lessons like armor. Still, nothing could have prepared him for what happened at 30,000 feet. One row back, a passenger claimed Malik's music was too loud. Another said his backpack was blocking the aisle. Each complaint small on its own, but together they built pressure. The kind of pressure Malik recognized all too well. And then, the flight attendant arrived. She told him to move his bag. He did. She told him to lower his music. He did. But when she asked him to stand up, to follow her to the back of the plane for questioning, Malik hesitated. Passengers around him glanced up, sensing something strange in her tone. That hesitation, that one pause, was all it took for everything to explode. The spray, the screams, the chaos, already told. But knowing who Malik was makes it hit harder. This wasn't just a boy. This was someone's son, someone's student, someone's dreamer. And in the middle of the uproar, slumped in a stranger's arms, fighting for air. His father still hadn't moved. Not yet. But the moment he did, justice itself would be tested at 30,000 feet. For nearly 10 minutes he hadn't moved. Not when passengers shouted. Not when Malik's body went limp. Not even when the attendant's call summoned the captain. He sat there, second row from the back, aisle seat, perfectly still, watching, measuring. Passengers wondered, why won't he help? Doesn't he see what's happening? What they didn't know was that Marcus Henderson had seen it all before. Finally, as Malik's head rolled against the nurse's shoulder, Marcus rose, slowly, calmly. But the effect was electric. Dozens of eyes snapped toward him, the way prey notices a predator entering the field. The flight attendant stiffened. She gripped the service cart like a shield. "Sir, I need you to remain seated." Marcus adjusted his cufflink, voice low but steady. "That's my son." The cabin fell silent. A woman near the front gasped. The nurse froze mid-breath. Even Malik stirred faintly, as if the sound of his father's voice cut through the fog of pain. The attendant blinked, mask of authority cracking. Your son?" Marcus stepped closer. His presence filled the aisle. Tall, broad-shouldered, his gray suit pressed, his gaze unshakable. There was no shouting, no threats, just certainty. The kind of certainty that makes people back away without realizing it. He knelt beside Malik, pressing 2 fingers gently against his son's neck. A pulse, weak, but there. Relief flickered across his face, gone in an instant. He whispered, "I've got you, son. Just hold on." Then he stood, and when he turned back toward the attendant, his tone changed. It sharpened, hardened. "You assaulted a minor, my minor, on record, in front of witnesses." Passengers exchanged glances. Phones rose higher, recording every word. The cabin was no longer just a scene, it was evidence. The attendant tried to recover. "Sir, I was following protocol." Marcus cut her off, his voice carrying down the rows. "Show me the page. Show me where it says pepper spray is protocol for teenagers complying with orders. Show me, right now." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. And that's when whispers began spreading. "He's a lawyer." "Oh my God, he's a civil rights lawyer." The rumor shot through the cabin like fire in dry grass. And when the attendant realized who she was standing against, it showed. A flicker of fear crossed her face, gone almost as quickly as it came. Marcus leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "You chose the wrong flight. You chose the wrong family." The cabin held its breath, because everyone knew this wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was the opening move in a battle that could end careers or lives. The chime sounded overhead. A door opened at the front of the plane. The captain stepped into the cabin. Crisp navy uniform, silver wings on his chest, a calm authority in his stride. But calm didn't mean neutral. Everyone knew the moment he arrived, this wasn't just a dispute anymore. This was official. The attendant straightened, relief flashing across her face. She pointed toward Marcus. "That's him, Captain. He's escalating the situation." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't move. He stood in the aisle, hands visible, voice steady. "Escalating?" He gestured toward Malik, still coughing in the nurse's arms. "That's a child, pepper-sprayed in your cabin, and you're telling me I'm the problem?" The captain's eyes narrowed. He scanned the passengers. Dozens of phones glinted back at him, recording, unblinking. His jaw tightened. He knew every word, every move would live online within minutes. Still, procedure was procedure. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat." Marcus shook his head. "No. What you need is medical attention for my son, and accountability for what just happened." The captain stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're jeopardizing this flight. Think carefully about your next move." Marcus's reply cut through the cabin like a blade. "No, Captain. Think carefully about yours." Passengers gasped. A man in row 18 muttered, "Oh, it's about to get real." The nurse spoke up, breaking the silence. "Captain, this boy needs oxygen. Now. He's in distress. If you don't act, you'll have more than a confrontation on your hands. You'll have a medical emergency." The captain hesitated. Authority clashed with responsibility. One more moment of delay could tip this from control to chaos. And that's when Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly, deliberately, every passenger tensed until they saw what he pulled out. A wallet. Inside, a bar card, gleaming under the cabin lights. Marcus Henderson, civil rights attorney, licensed in the state of Georgia. Everything you've done here tonight is already evidence. The cabin erupted. Whispers turned to open voices. He's a lawyer. They're done for. Oh, this is going to be a lawsuit. The captain's face froze. The attendant's hands trembled. And for the first time since the flight began, authority no longer belonged to the uniform. It belonged to the man in the gray suit. For a moment it seemed settled. Marcus had spoken, the cabin had shifted, and the balance of power was his. But not everyone agreed. From row 12 a man stood up, white hair, pressed blazer, a voice that carried authority even without a microphone. "I'm an air marshal," he declared, flashing a badge so quickly some passengers barely caught it. "And this man," he pointed straight at Marcus, "is obstructing crew orders." The cabin erupted again. Gasps, murmurs, a wave of uncertainty. The very same passengers who had cheered Marcus seconds earlier now looked torn. Authority was stacking against him. The attendant's shoulders straightened, confidence returning. She leaned toward the marshal, voice sharp with relief. "Thank you. He's been aggressive from the start." Marcus didn't move. His eyes locked on the badge. His voice, calm but cutting. "Obstructing or protecting my son from unlawful assault?" The marshal stepped closer, hand resting on his hip. He didn't draw his weapon, but the implication was there, hanging heavy in the recycled cabin air. "Sit down, sir, or I will make you sit down." Passengers gasped. One woman whispered, "Is he really going to arrest him for saving his kid?" Phones rose higher. Cameras zoomed in. Every second became a record. Every word an exhibit. The nurse clutched Malik tighter, voice trembling but fierce. "This boy needs help, not a courtroom drama at 30,000 feet. The marshal ignored her, eyes never leaving Marcus. "Last warning." And in that instant, Marcus did something nobody expected. He stepped forward, not aggressive, not reckless, just close enough that the marshal could see the fire in his eyes. Then, in a voice low enough to chill the rows around them, he asked, "Do you really want to be the man who sided with pepper spray against a child? Because when this lands, and it will, you won't be hiding behind that badge." The marshal froze, his jaw clenched, and for the first time, doubt flickered. The tension hung like a storm about to break. Because in the war for control of Flight 228, the next move could decide everything. The aisle had become a standoff. On one side, Marcus Henderson, father, lawyer, protector. On the other, The U.S. Air Marshal, badge in hand, voice laced with threat. Passengers whispered, torn between fear and outrage. Half clutched their armrests, praying for calm. The other half raised their phones higher, knowing history was unfolding in real time. Marcus didn't blink. His voice lowered, steady, like he was cross-examining a witness in court. "Let me ask you something, Marshal. Did you actually witness my son commit a crime? Or did you only see him coughing after being pepper-sprayed by your crew?" The Marshal's jaw flexed. "That's irrelevant. My job is to maintain order." Marcus stepped closer, not threatening, but commanding. Order or cover-up, because order doesn't come from silencing victims. It comes from upholding the law, and last I checked, assaulting a minor on U.S. soil, even 30,000 feet above it, is still a felony. The words cut deep. Passengers gasped. One man muttered, "He's right." The Marshal's hand hovered near his belt, hesitation flashing in his eyes. He was used to compliance, not resistance this sharp, this surgical. Marcus pressed harder. "So let's be clear. If you want to arrest someone tonight, do it in front of all these witnesses. Put the cuffs on me, and then explain to their cameras why you ignored a child choking on chemical spray while defending the very person who used it." Phones zoomed in, every angle captured. The Air Marshal froze. His authority, once absolute, suddenly felt fragile under the weight of 50 lenses. The captain shifted uneasily. The attendant's confidence drained once more. The balance of power was tilting. Again. And then from the back of the plane, a voice shouted, "He's right. That boy needs help now." Applause broke out. A wave of support rolled forward, passengers finding their courage. The Marshal's face reddened. He glanced at the captain, then back at Marcus, and in that silent exchange, everyone realized the tide had turned. For the moment, because Marcus had won this round, but the war for Flight 228 was far from over. The cabin had shifted. For the first time since the chaos began, Marcus stood taller, the Marshal silent, the captain hesitant, the attendant shrinking in her uniform. Applause still echoed faintly down the rows, a chorus of passengers finding their voices, but then one voice cut through it all. From the middle rows, a man stood, mid-40s, stocky build, baseball cap pulled low. His tone was sharp, almost triumphant. "I know you. You're Marcus Henderson." Marcus turned, expression unreadable. The man's finger pointed like an accusation. "Yeah, I remember. You're that lawyer, the one who got that cop fired back in Atlanta, the one who sued the department." The energy in the cabin fractured. Cheers fell into murmurs. Gasps spread like wildfire, because suddenly this wasn't just about a father defending his son. This was about Marcus himself, his past, his cases, his enemies. And on a plane full of strangers, not everyone saw him as a hero. The man's voice grew louder. "You ruined good officers' lives. My brother was one of them. He lost everything because of you." The Marshal's eyes lit with recognition. The captain straightened, as if a new weapon had just been handed to him. The attendant, shaking minutes ago, smirked through her fear. Marcus stood still, calm, but his son's labored breathing behind him was a brutal reminder. Every second wasted in arguments was a second. Malik's lungs fought for air. Passengers looked between the two men, their loyalties shaken. Some muttered, "Wait, is that true?" Others whispered, "Does it matter? Look at the boy." But perception is power, and in that moment, Marcus's power slipped, just slightly, because the narrative had shifted. He wasn't just a father. He was a controversial lawyer, a fighter with a history, a man some people hated. The man in the baseball cap stepped forward, eyes burning. "Tell them, Marcus. Tell them what you really are." The cabin froze, waiting, because whatever Marcus said next could make him the plane's hero, or its villain. The plane held its breath. Every camera phone was aimed. Every passenger leaned forward. The man in the cap smirked, voice laced with venom. Go on, Marcus. Tell them how many families you've destroyed with your lawsuits. Tell them who you really are. For the first time, Marcus's shoulders dipped, not in defeat, but in the heavy weight of memory. His eyes closed briefly, as if replaying faces, courtrooms, verdicts. When he opened them, his voice was lower, calmer, but sharp enough to cut steel. Who I am. He gestured toward Malik, still trembling in the nurse's arms. I'm a father. First, last, always. He let the words hang, then continued. But yes, I'm also a lawyer, and I have stood in courtrooms where young men just like my son never made it home. I've seen their names turned into headlines, their mothers turned into mourners. I didn't ruin families. I defended them. The man in the cap scoffed. Defended? You took down cops. Good cops. Marcus's voice rose, not in anger, but in a swell of conviction that filled the cabin. Good cops don't choke boys in the street. Good cops don't plant evidence. Good cops don't make mothers bury sons. If that's who your brother was, then the truth ruined him, not me. Gasps, murmurs. Passengers shifted again, the tide pulling back toward Marcus. Some clapped softly, others nodded, whispers of, "He's right," spreading through the rows. But not everyone. The man in the cap wasn't finished. His face twisted, rage spilling out. And what about the case you lost? The one where your client was guilty? You walked out of that courtroom while an entire neighborhood blamed you. You think you're some kind of savior? You're not. The words hit like a strike. Marcus froze, his jaw clenched, because buried inside the insult was truth, a case he had lost, a case that still haunted him. The cabin shifted again, doubt crawling back into the air. Marcus's eyes flicked down to Malik, chest still heaving, sketchbook fallen to the floor. His hand tightened into a fist. Then slowly he released it. He looked back up, meeting the man's stare head on. You want the truth? Fine. I don't win every battle, but I fight every single one. And tonight I'm fighting for my son. Nothing you say will stop that. The nurse whispered, barely audible, Amen. And in that fragile silence, a baby began to cry, a sound that cut through the tension like thunder, a reminder of innocence, of fragility, of what was truly at stake. Passengers shifted again, more now siding with Marcus, more disgusted at the crew's silence. But the captain and marshal weren't done. They exchanged a glance, a silent agreement. And when the captain reached for the intercom again, everyone knew. This battle was about to escalate to an entirely new level. The captain's hand hovered over the intercom. The cabin, already electric with tension, grew heavier still. When he pressed the button, his voice echoed across the speakers, firm and unyielding. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a passenger disturbance, we are preparing to divert this flight to the nearest airport. Federal agents will be waiting upon arrival. Gasps, groans. Passengers erupted in protest. A mother clutched her toddler, shaking her head. You can't do this! He didn't do anything! A man shouted. The only disturbance is her. She pepper-sprayed a kid. But the captain ignored them, eyes locked on Marcus. The marshal stepped closer, voice low, threatening. It's over. Sit down now, or you'll be in cuffs the second we touch ground. Marcus's jaw tightened. His mind raced. A diversion meant headlines, federal custody. His son pulled from his arms. He had fought in courtrooms stacked against him. But this? This was a trap at 30,000 feet. The nurse clutched Malik, fury in her voice. He needs a hospital, not handcuffs. If you land this plane anywhere but his city, you'll put him in more danger. The passengers erupted louder, voices colliding in chaos. Half shouted for the captain to stop, half begged Marcus not to resist, and through it all, Marcus stood still, silent, thinking, calculating. Then he spoke, calm, controlled, every word measured. Captain, Let me remind you of something. Every single phone in this cabin is recording. If you divert this flight, you are no longer de-escalating. You are retaliating. And when this video reaches the ground, you won't just answer to the FAA, you'll answer to the American public. The captain's hand froze on the controls. The marshal's jaw clenched. Passengers cheered. Some shouted, "Yes!" Others pounded the armrests. The momentum swung again, toward Marcus. But then, from the corner of the cabin, came a sound no one expected. A ding. A notification tone, followed by another, and another. Passengers looked down at their phones. Confusion spread like fire. Somehow, mid-air, messages were breaking through, and all the alerts carried the same subject line, Marcus Henderson. Passengers scrolled, eyes widening. Articles, headlines, old cases, some victories, some defeats, some accusations. Someone, somewhere, was feeding the world Marcus's story, while he was still in the sky. And suddenly, it wasn't just the cabin judging him, it was the entire country. At first it was whispers, then gasps, then the sound of dozens of passengers murmuring Marcus's name like a secret finally spoken aloud. Marcus Henderson. Wait, is that really him? The lawyer? The one from Atlanta? Didn't he defend that case with the officer? Heads turned, eyes darted. Phones glowed in every direction, headlines spilling across the aisle like wildfire. The marshal smirked, the corner of his mouth twitching upward. Looks like your reputation beat you to it. Marcus didn't flinch, but inside his stomach dropped. Someone had reached the press. Someone had sent his name, his face, his past. And that meant this wasn't just an in-flight conflict anymore. This was a public trial in real time. Passengers argued louder now, voices splitting the cabin in half. He's a hero. Look at the cases he's won. Hero. He ruined careers, put good people in the ground. That flight attendant pepper-sprayed a child, and you're worried about his resume? Chaos. Pure chaos. The cabin had become a courtroom with no judge, no rules, just judgment. Marcus lifted his chin, trying to steady his voice. Ask yourselves why this is happening now. Who sent those stories? Why here? Why tonight? For a moment, the passengers hesitated. The question cut through the noise, and then a voice from the back. Cold, sharp, too calm for the moment. I did. Every head turned. A man stood up slowly, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark business suit that seemed out of place for a late-night flight. His phone was still in his hand, the screen glowing faintly. His eyes locked on Marcus with something far deeper than disdain. The world deserves to know exactly who you are before this circus goes any further. Marcus's chest tightened. He recognized the face, not immediately, but with the creeping dread of memory. A deposition years ago, a courtroom exchange, a corporate giant who had lost a case because of him. This wasn't random, this was orchestrated. Passengers fell silent again, the air stretching thin. The captain didn't speak. The marshal didn't move. Even the flight attendant's breathing hitched, because this was no longer just an argument. It was a showdown. Marcus versus a ghost from his past, on a stage no one could walk away from. The man in the suit moved down the aisle slowly, each step deliberate, as though the narrow space had become his courtroom. Passengers leaned away, others craned their necks, phones trembling in their hands, desperate to record every word. Marcus stayed still, jaw clenched, eyes fixed. He knew this wasn't a stranger. This was Alan Whitford, CEO of a corporation Marcus had brought to its knees 5 years earlier, a case involving discrimination, wrongful terminations, and settlements that had cost Whitford millions. Whitford stopped just 3 rows from Marcus. His voice was measured, almost silky, carrying the weight of authority. Ladies and gentlemen, you think you're witnessing a father defending his son, but you don't know the full picture. You don't know him. He lifted his phone, tilting the screen for the nearest passengers to see. Headlines scrolled. Controversial civil rights lawyer Marcus Henderson, loved by some, hated by many. Gasps rippled. Whitford continued, eyes never leaving Marcus. This man thrives on chaos. He's made his career out of tearing down good people, weaponizing race, destroying reputations. And now, look at him, using his own son's suffering as a shield. The words cut like knives. Some passengers shifted uneasily, uncertainty gnawing at their earlier applause. Malik wheezed faintly behind Marcus, every shallow breath an urgent reminder of what was at stake. But Whitford pressed on, relentless. Ask yourselves, are you really sure you're on the right side? Or is this just another performance, another headline waiting to happen? The marshal smirked, emboldened. The flight attendant, still shaken, suddenly found her courage returning in Whitford's shadow. But Marcus didn't move. His silence was louder than any defense. His eyes burned, not with rage, but with the knowledge that this moment wasn't about him alone. It was about Malik, about truth. Finally, Marcus spoke. His voice was low, steady, carrying across the cabin like steel wrapped in velvet. Alan Whitford, I should have known. Tell me, did you follow us here? Or was it just luck you ended up on this flight? Whitford's lips curved into the faintest smile. Luck? No, Marcus. I don't believe in luck. I believe in making things happen. The words lingered like smoke. Passengers shivered, some whispering, "Wait, is this a setup? Did he plan this?" Others muttered, "No, no way, not on a plane." But Marcus knew better. This wasn't coincidence. This was a trap, and the walls of the cabin were closing in. For a long moment, silence ruled the cabin. The only sound was the soft wheeze of Malik struggling for air, the faint rattle of his chest pulling at every heart that still had one. Marcus straightened, eyes never leaving Whitford. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Calm carried farther than shouting. You want to tell them who I am, Alan? Fine. Tell them everything. Tell them about the case you lost. Tell them about the workers you fired without paychecks. Tell them about the families you left hungry while your company posted record profits. Murmurs, sharp, sudden. Passengers turned, whispering frantically. Some remembered those headlines. Some pulled out their phones to confirm. Marcus's tone hardened. You call me a man who thrives on chaos. But the truth? The only chaos here is a child gasping for air while grown adults argue about headlines. He turned, pointing to Malik. His son's face was pale, eyes half closed. The sight was a dagger through every chest in the cabin. Look at him. Forget me. Forget Whitford. Forget the past. Tell me, does any of this justify what she did to him? The flight attendant shrank again, her shoulders curling. The marshal's smirk faltered. Even the captain at the cockpit door shifted uncomfortably. Marcus took a step forward, his presence commanding, his words deliberate. This isn't a trial. It's not a courtroom. It's a plane, 30,000 feet above the ground. And right now, every one of you has a choice. Do you want to stand by while a child suffers, or do you want to do something about it? Passengers fell into uneasy silence. Then, a voice from the aisle. He's right. That boy needs help. Another voice followed. Forget the politics. Look at the kid. The tide shifted, slowly but unmistakably. Whitford's smug expression faltered, the cracks in his composure widening as the weight of Marcus's words spread through the cabin like fire. Marcus pressed once more, voice firm but calm. Alan Whitford has money, power, and platforms to smear my name. But here, right here, there's no PR team, no press release, just the truth. And the truth is simple. My son can't breathe. A hush fell. The jury wasn't divided anymore, not fully. The scales tilted, and for the first time since Whitford's reveal, Marcus held the room. But the battle was far from over, because Whitford didn't come unprepared, and the card he was about to play would shake the cabin all over again. The balance had shifted. For the first time, Marcus felt the cabin leaning toward him. Not completely, but enough. The murmurs were softer now, less hostile, more uncertain. His words had struck home. Malik's shallow breaths had pierced through pride and politics alike. But Alan Whitford wasn't a man who lost gracefully. His jaw tightened, and for the first time his polished composure cracked. He slipped a hand inside his suit jacket, slow, deliberate. Passengers tensed, some gasping, others clutching the armrests. When his hand emerged, it wasn't empty. He held up a folder, thick, worn at the edges, but unmistakably real. He tossed it onto the empty tray table of the nearest row. Papers spilled across the aisle, scattering like broken promises. "You think this man is a hero? Read it." The nearest passenger picked up a sheet, eyes darting across the page. Their face paled. Others leaned in, grabbing pages, whispering urgently. Whitford's voice rose, sharp and venomous. "Every deposition, every lawsuit, every accusation that never made it to trial. He's built a career not on truth, but on manipulation. Half these families never saw a dime. The other half? They were used and discarded once the cameras left." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Some passengers clutched their phones tighter, filming, others flipping through the papers with growing unease. Marcus's face didn't move, but inside, fury burned. He knew those documents, twisted, cherry-picked, stripped of context, half-truths designed to smear, and Whitford had waited for this moment, this stage, to unleash them. Passengers muttered louder now. "Wait, is this true? Did he really abandon people? Why would he lie about that kid then?" The marshal smirked again, emboldened. The flight attendant's trembling faded as she clung to Whitford's words like a lifeline. Even the captain at the door seemed to stand taller, as if the tide had turned once more. Whitford leaned closer, voice low but deadly. "You don't know him like I do. Marcus Henderson isn't here to protect his son. He's here to put on another show, another circus for the headlines." He spread his arms wide, looking to the cabin like a preacher to a congregation. "And you're all the audience. Tell me, are you buying the act?" The silence that followed was deafening. Some eyes were filled with doubt, others with anger. A few still clung to Marcus's side, but the balance was breaking again, and Malik, weak, barely conscious, let out a strained, rattling cough that cut through the noise like a gunshot. Marcus's heart clenched. This wasn't about Whitford. It wasn't about him. It was about saving his boy before time ran out. But Whitford had just poisoned the jury, and the clock was still ticking. The papers still littered the aisle, whispers still swirling like a storm. But for Marcus, none of it mattered in that moment. Because Malik's breathing had changed. It was faint before, shallow and ragged. Now, it was worse. Each inhale came with a desperate hitch, each exhale a fragile rattle. His eyelids fluttered, barely able to stay open. His lips had taken on a bluish tint that froze Marcus's blood. "Dad." Malik's voice was barely a whisper, a trembling plea that only Marcus could hear. The cabin noise faded, the accusations, the murmurs, even Whitford's venomous voice. All of it blurred under the sound of his son's fight for air. Marcus dropped to his knees beside Malik, his hand cradling the back of his son's neck. He whispered urgently, "Stay with me, son. Just stay with me. We're almost through this." Passengers turned, eyes widening. Even those who had doubted, those who had whispered against Marcus, couldn't look away from the boy fighting for every breath. The sound of it tore through the cabin sharper than any argument. A woman in the aisle, an older nurse traveling back from visiting family, stood and pressed forward. "He needs help now. This boy won't last like this." The marshal stepped forward, but she snapped at him. "Don't touch him unless you're bringing oxygen." Her words cut the air. The passengers stirred, murmurs rising again, not about Marcus, not about Whitford, but about the child. Marcus raised his head, his eyes locking on Whitford. For the first time his voice cracked, not with weakness, but with urgency sharpened into fury. You've had your say. You've twisted my past, poisoned the air in this cabin, but my son doesn't have time for your theater." He stood, shoulders squared, voice carrying to every corner of the plane. "This ends now." The shift was immediate. Passengers sat straighter. The captain froze at the doorway. Even Whitford's smug smile faltered just slightly, because the clock wasn't just ticking, it was screaming. And Marcus Henderson was about to turn the trial upside down. Marcus stood tall, his frame casting a shadow across the aisle. The documents Whitford had scattered lay at his feet like discarded weapons. He stooped, picked one up, and held it high for the cabin to see. His voice rang out, steady, but edged with fire. "This is what power does. It twists the truth into something unrecognizable. A real case, reduced to half a page, stripped of context. A family that fought for justice, reduced to a bullet point." He flipped the page over, letting it flutter back onto the pile. "Do you know why Alan Whitford carries these papers? Not because they're true, but because he lost. He lost to me. He lost to the people I stood beside. And tonight, he thought he could use his money and his lies to bury me all over again." Passengers shifted, leaning in. Some began nodding, their doubt softening. Others whispered, "He's right. These are out of context." Marcus lifted another paper. "This one? A settlement for a black family evicted without notice. Did they get every dollar they deserved? No. But they got a roof over their heads again because someone fought for them when no one else would." Another paper, another story, each one a life, a struggle, a scar. Marcus gave them voices again, voices Whitford had tried to erase. Finally, he let the last page fall. His eyes locked on Whitford. His voice dropped low, but every word carried. "Alan Whitford calls me a man who thrives on chaos. But what you're seeing isn't chaos. It's the cost of fighting men like him." The cabin was silent. Even the marshal no longer smirked. Even the captain's stern posture cracked. The flight attendant, trembling once more, couldn't meet his eyes. Marcus turned, gesturing to Malik. "Say whatever you want about me. Call me controversial. Call me a troublemaker. But don't you dare ignore the truth sitting right here. My son can't breathe. And every second wasted on Whitford's lies is a second stolen from him." The nurse stepped forward again, her voice firm. "He needs oxygen now. Either the crew does something, or we land this plane." Passengers erupted, not in chaos this time, but in demand. "Give the boy oxygen. Do something! Captain, land the plane if you have to." The pressure was no longer on Marcus. It was on the crew, on Whitford, on the system itself. Whitford's face twisted, fury finally breaking through his mask. For the first time, Alan Whitford wasn't in control. And Marcus? Marcus had turned the cabin into his courtroom, and the jury had spoken. The shouting of passengers pressed in from all sides. For once, it wasn't against Marcus. It was for Malik. "Oxygen! Help the boy! Captain, land this plane now!" The captain's face was pale as he stepped into the aisle. His voice cracked just slightly. "We're diverting to St. Louis. Emergency landing. 10 minutes out." Relief swept over some passengers, a sigh of hope rolling through the rows. But 10 minutes in the air could feel like an eternity for a boy gasping for life. The nurse crouched over Malik, pressing her fingers to his pulse, her brow furrowing with worry. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just a little longer. We'll get you help." Marcus knelt beside them, hand gripping his son's tightly. His other hand pressed against his knee to steady the tremor threatening to overtake him. But not everyone was silent. Alan Whitford, red-faced, voice sharper now, hurled his words like daggers. "This is a mistake. You're letting him control the entire cabin. You're jeopardizing federal law, procedure, safety." Passengers cut him off with a roar. "Sit down. We don't want to hear it. You've done enough." The marshal, who had been silently weighing the storm, finally stepped forward. But instead of Marcus, his eyes locked on Whitford. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat. Now." For the first time, Whitford faltered. His authority, his weaponized reputation, his staged ambush, all of it crumbled under the collective weight of the cabin. Marcus looked up, his voice calm but edged with fire. "Your game is over, Alan. My son's fight. That's the only thing that matters now." Whitford sat down, trembling with rage, his eyes narrowing as if promising that the fight wasn't finished. Not here, not tonight, but soon. The engines roared louder, the plane tilting into descent. Lights flickered as seatbelt signs chimed. Passengers gripped their armrests, not from turbulence, but from the electric knowledge that this landing would change everything. Marcus whispered to Malik, his words soft but unbreakable. "We're almost there, son. Hold on, just hold on." The cabin held its breath, because though the landing was minutes away, nobody knew what waited when those wheels hit the ground. Was justice waiting at the terminal, or another trial, bigger than this one, waiting to begin? The plane jolted, wheels slamming hard against the St. Louis runway. Gasps and cries filled the cabin as the lights flickered overhead. The descent had been steep, hurried, urgent. The brakes screeched, pressing passengers against their seatbelts. Then silence, broken only by the hum of slowing engines and the relentless, rattling coughs of Malik Henderson. Before the plane even reached the gate, flashing red lights appeared outside the windows. Sirens, emergency crews waiting on the tarmac. The cabin doors burst open and paramedics stormed inside, pushing past stunned passengers. "Where's the boy?" one of them shouted. Marcus raised his hand immediately, his voice breaking. "Here! Here! My son!" They descended on Malik, oxygen mask strapped to his face in seconds, tubes and monitors springing to life. The nurse stepped aside, relief softening her tired features. Marcus held Malik's hand as the boy's chest began to rise and fall, just a little easier under the mask. The passengers exhaled together, some weeping openly. Strangers who had moments earlier argued bitterly now clutched each other's arms, united in relief. But not all eyes softened, because as Malik was carried onto the waiting stretcher, Alan Whitford sat stiffly in his seat, jaw clenched, eyes locked on Marcus. No smug smile now, no words, just a cold, burning promise that this battle was far from over. The marshal followed the stretcher down the aisle, pausing only once, to glance back at Marcus. His look was unreadable. Respect? Distrust? Both? The captain's announcement crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you remain seated while medical personnel assist the passengers. Law enforcement will be meeting us at the gate." Passengers exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Marcus walked beside the stretcher, his son's small hand still in his. His voice trembled as he whispered, "We made it, Malik. You're safe now. Just keep breathing, son. Just keep breathing." But as he stepped off the plane, flashing lights reflected off the windows, sirens wailed in the distance, and uniformed officers stood waiting. Was this the moment justice would finally side with him, or the moment everything he had fought for would be stripped away? The story didn't end on the runway. It had only just begun. The sterile white walls of the St. Louis General Emergency Wing hummed under flickering fluorescent lights. The smell of antiseptic stung the air, sharp and clinical, as Malik was rushed through double doors, swallowed by a team of doctors in scrubs. Marcus stood frozen, his palm still warm from his son's fading grip. For the first time since the flight began, silence pressed against him. No flight attendants, no angry passengers, no Alan Whitford sneering from across an aisle. Just silence, until a voice broke it. "Mr. Henderson?" A police officer in a Navy uniform stepped forward, notebook already in hand. His badge caught the light, his face unreadable. Behind him, another officer waited, arms folded, eyes cold. "We'll need your statement about what happened on that flight." Marcus's jaw tightened. He wanted to protest. "My son is fighting to breathe, and you want paperwork?" But the sharp stare of the second officer told him the stakes were shifting again. He was no longer just a father. He was once more a lawyer, and perhaps a suspect. Passengers trickled into the waiting area, whispers rippling among them. Some avoided Marcus's gaze, sliding into seats with bowed heads. Others, like the young woman with the denim jacket, looked straight at him, fire still in her eyes. "She saved that boy's life," she muttered to anyone who would listen, pointing toward the nurse who now sat quietly by the vending machine. "And they treated her like a criminal." The room grew tense, divided, lines drawn again, this time on hospital tile instead of airplane carpet. Then the doors swung open. And there he was, Alan Whitford, his tailored jacket draped over one arm, his phone glued to his ear. Two men in suits followed close behind, their steps purposeful, their eyes sharp. The temperature of the room shifted. Everyone noticed. Whitford ended his call, his voice booming now for all to hear. "We'll be filing charges. Assaulting a crew member, endangering a flight. They think they can humiliate me? They'll regret this." He didn't look at Marcus directly, but his words were darts, thrown with precision. And just as Marcus clenched his fists, ready to respond, a doctor appeared at the edge of the waiting room. Her expression unreadable, her clipboard pressed tight to her chest. Every breath in the room seemed to stop. "Are you family of Malik Henderson?" she asked softly. Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding louder than the sirens still echoing outside. The answer that came next would change everything. The waiting room fell still as the doctor stepped closer, her eyes soft but her posture firm. "Mr. Henderson, your son is stable." Marcus's knees nearly buckled. Relief washed through him like a flood breaking a dam. He pressed his palms together, whispering a thank you that never quite formed into words. The doctor continued, "He inhaled a concentrated chemical, but we've cleared his lungs. He'll need monitoring tonight, but he's breathing on his own again." A small cheer rippled through the room. The nurse lowered her head, quietly wiping a tear. Even the denim jacket passenger let out a shaky laugh of relief. But not everyone celebrated. Alan Whitford leaned back in his chair, his voice cutting through the fragile peace. "Stable or not, laws were broken on that plane, and I intend to see justice done." The doctor gave him a look that said she had no patience for his bluster, then turned back to Marcus. "You can see him now. Just be gentle. He's still very weak." Marcus followed her down the hall, the world around him dimming until only the soft beep of monitors filled his ears. Malik lay small in the hospital bed, tubes running from his arms, chest rising and falling steadily. Marcus reached for his son's hand and whispered, "You're safe now. I promise you, nobody will ever take your breath away again." Malik's lips moved faintly, a whisper barely audible. "Dad, did I do something wrong?" The question hit Marcus harder than anything Alan Whitford could have said, because this was the truth at the center of it all. Not just a legal battle, not just a clash of power. It was a boy, scarred by the idea that his very existence could be treated as a crime. Marcus blinked back tears, gripping his son's hand tighter. "No, son, you did everything right. This fight isn't yours, it's mine, and I'll never stop." And if you believe no child should ever have to ask that question, subscribe right now. Because stories like this aren't just fiction, they reflect the battles still being fought every day. Back in the waiting room, the arguments simmered, lawyers drafted statements, and officers flipped through their notes. The world outside was already spinning this into headlines, hashtags, and debate shows. But in that hospital room, only one truth mattered. A father had stood up, a son had survived, and a war much bigger than either of them was waiting outside those doors. The screen fades to black. But let me leave you with this. Was justice really served, or had the fight just begun? Comment below, what would you have done if it were your family?